I want to tell you a number that I have not been able to shake since I found it, and then I want to tell you the one nobody talks about at all. 27% of American women between 65 and 74 live alone. For women 75 and older, it is 43%. 43%. Nearly half of the women in this country over 75 are living by themselves, and in 1950, about 10% of Americans over 65 lived alone. Today it is around 28%. That's roughly 6 million men and more than 10 million women. But here's the one that stopped me cold, and I had to read it 3 times. Researchers estimate that around 4 million American solo agers are living with cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, or dementia. And many of them, in the words of the researcher who studies this, lack an advocate who can help them go to medical appointments and manage their medication and their daily lives. 4 million people losing their memory, with nobody whose job it is to notice. I'm not telling you that to frighten you. I'm telling you because there are things you can do about this, and almost nobody knows what they are, and I want you to know them before you need them. 28% of us live alone now, and in 1950 it was 10. So let me lay out what's actually happened here, because I think when you see the shape of it, you'll understand why nothing in this country is set up for it. According to Census data reported by KFF Health News, about 28% of people 65 and older now live by themselves. That's slightly fewer than 6 million men and slightly more than 10 million women. In 1950, that number was around 10%, so it nearly tripled in 75 years. And I want to be careful about how I describe that, because it's not one story. Some of it is that people are living longer, which is good. Some of it is that we got wealthier as a country, and more people could afford their own household, which is also good. Some of it is divorce, which changed enormously in our lifetimes. Some of it is that people had fewer children or none, and a real portion of it is choice. AARP surveyed over 500 people between 50 and 95 who live alone, and 35% said freedom and autonomy were the best parts of living alone. 35%, more than a third. So let's not pretend everybody living alone is sitting there miserable, because that isn't what the people themselves say. 22% said loneliness was the worst part, so both things are true at once, which is usually how life works. Now, let me give you the fuller picture, because living alone and being alone are 2 different things, and they get mixed up constantly. AARP puts the number of people 50 and older who live alone without a spouse, partner, or anyone else under the same roof at 24 million. That's 21% of all adults over 50. Narrow it further. A 2023 AARP report found that 1 in 10 adults over 50 lives alone and has no partner and no children. Narrow it more. Census figures indicate about 8% of adults 55 and older have no biological children and no spouse or partner, and then the smallest and most vulnerable group of all. A study in the Journals of Gerontology estimated that roughly 1% of American adults 55 and up have no spouse or partner, no children, and no living siblings. That's nearly 1 million Americans with no immediate family at all. Researchers call it being kinless. Among women over 75, that figure rises to about 3%. So think about the layers there. 16 million living alone. 24 million over 50 with nobody in the house. Around 15 million older adults with no children at all, which is about 1 in 6 seniors, and close to 1 million with essentially nobody. Now here's what I keep coming back to. Every system in this country, and I mean every single one, was built on the assumption that you have family. The hospital assumes somebody is picking you up. The surgery center literally will not do the procedure unless you name a person who will drive you home. The rehab facility assumes somebody's coming to advocate. The senior living industry assumes a family caregiver exists. The Medicaid application assumes somebody will help you fill out 40 pages of paperwork. The doctor assumes somebody's making sure you take the pills, and for millions of us, that person does not exist. Not because anything went wrong, because life went the way it went. Every form in America asks who to call, and some of us don't have an answer. I want to talk about a small thing that turns out not to be small at all, and it's the thing that makes people cry in my comments. The emergency contact line. You fill in a form at a hospital, or for a procedure, or at a new doctor's office, or for an assisted living application, and there it is. Emergency contact, next of kin, who should we call? And for a substantial and growing number of Americans, that question genuinely has no easy answer. Maybe you never married. Maybe you were widowed 12 years ago. Maybe you have no children, or your children are overseas, or the relationship ended long before your retirement did. And so you sit there with a pen at 74 years old, trying to think of somebody, and what you're actually doing in that moment is taking inventory of your entire life. I've had women write to me and describe putting down the name of a neighbor they barely know because they couldn't think of anyone else, and then feeling ashamed about it in the parking lot afterward. Let me say something about that shame before I go any further. It is not evidence of a failed life. It is arithmetic. If you outlive your husband and your siblings and your closest friends, which is what happens when you live a long time, then at some point the list gets short. That's not a character flaw. That's what long life does. But I do want to be practical, because there are real consequences to that blank line, and there are real solutions. Here's the consequence. If you cannot name someone, then in a genuine emergency, decisions get made by whoever is standing there, according to whatever the default rules are in your state, and you have no say in it. And here's the solution, and it's the single most important thing in this entire video. You need a healthcare power of attorney, sometimes called a healthcare proxy or a medical power of attorney depending on your state. It is a document that names a specific person to make medical decisions for you, if you cannot make them yourself. That person does not have to be a relative. There is no requirement anywhere that it be family. It can be a friend, a neighbor, a former colleague, somebody from your church. It just has to be somebody who has agreed to do it and who you trust. You also need a financial power of attorney, which is a separate document naming somebody to handle money matters and an advance directive stating what care you do and don't want. And here is the part almost nobody does. Having the document is not enough. You have to tell the person, you have to give them a copy. You have to make sure they've agreed and understand what they're agreeing to, and you have to give a copy to your doctor's office so it's in your chart. I know several people who have these documents beautifully drawn up sitting in a safe deposit box that nobody can access, which is exactly the same as not having them. Now, what if you genuinely cannot think of a person? There are options and hardly anybody knows about them. Some states allow you to name a professional. There are geriatric care managers, sometimes called aging life care professionals, who can be hired to serve in that role. Some attorneys and some nonprofit organizations serve as agents. It costs money, and it is dramatically better than the alternative, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Because if you don't name anybody, somebody gets named for you, and you will have no idea who they are. If you name nobody, a court will appoint a stranger to run your life. All right. This is the section I most want you to hear, and I've hesitated about how to say it because I don't want to frighten anybody, but I've decided that not telling you would be worse. Here's what happens if you become unable to make decisions for yourself, and you have not named anybody in a legal document. Somebody petitions a court. It might be a hospital, because they need somebody to authorize a discharge. It might be a facility. It might be a distant relative. It might be Adult Protective Services. And the court appoints a guardian, which in some states is called a conservator. That guardian gets legal authority over your decisions. Depending on how broad the order is, that can include where you live, what medical care you receive, and how your money is spent. In a full guardianship, a person can lose the legal right to make essentially any decision about their own life. And if you have no family, the court appoints a professional guardian, which is a stranger, someone you have never met, who is paid out of your assets to make decisions about your life. Now, I want to be fair here, because I don't want to smear an entire profession. There are professional guardians who do genuinely good work, who take on cases nobody else will take, and who advocate hard for vulnerable people. The system exists because some people truly have nobody, and without it, they'd be abandoned entirely. But there have been serious documented abuse cases in this country, and they got national attention for good reason. There have been guardians who took on dozens or hundreds of wards, isolated them from friends, sold their homes and belongings, and billed the estate for it all. There have been criminal prosecutions. There have been legislative reforms in multiple states as a result, and the reason abuse is possible is structural, not accidental. The person under guardianship frequently cannot advocate for themselves, which is precisely why a guardian was appointed. Oversight varies enormously by state and by county. Court dockets are overwhelmed. And in a great many cases, nobody is checking, because the whole reason the person ended up there is that they had nobody checking on them in the first place. So the population most at risk of a bad guardianship outcome is exactly the population we're talking about in this video. And I want to give you the number that makes this concrete, because it surprised me. Estimates suggest well over 1 million American adults are currently under some form of guardianship or conservatorship, with billions of dollars in assets under the control of guardians. The exact figures are genuinely hard to pin down, and that itself is part of the problem. There is no unified national tracking system. Guardianship is handled county by county, court by court, and in many places the records aren't aggregated anywhere, which means nobody actually knows how many Americans have lost the legal right to make their own decisions. Think about that for a second. We can tell you to the dollar how much is in a Social Security trust fund, and we cannot tell you how many adults in this country have had their autonomy transferred to somebody else by a court. There have been reform efforts. Some states have strengthened oversight, required more frequent reporting, and expanded the use of what's called supported decision-making, which is an alternative that helps a person make their own decisions with assistance rather than taking the decisions away entirely. That's genuine progress, and it's worth knowing about because supported decision-making agreements are available in a growing number of states and are far less restrictive than guardianship. But the reforms are uneven, and none of them help you if you arrive at that courthouse with no documents and nobody to speak for you. Now here's the good news, and it is genuinely good. Guardianship is supposed to be a last resort. Courts are supposed to consider less restrictive alternatives first, and the most powerful, less restrictive alternative is a validly executed power of attorney, naming somebody you chose. If you have named an agent in writing before you lost capacity, a court in most circumstances will honor that rather than appointing a stranger. That is the whole ball game. A form signed while you are well is the difference between your life being managed by someone you picked and your life being managed by someone assigned to you. I cannot think of a better argument for spending a few $100s with an elder law attorney than that one. And if money is genuinely tight, please know that many states have free or low-cost options. Legal aid organizations frequently help seniors with these documents. Some area agencies on aging run clinics. Some bar associations hold free legal days for older adults. Some hospitals will give you advance directive forms and help you complete them at no charge. Call your area agency on aging and ask. There is a version of this that costs almost nothing, and it is worth more than nearly anything else you own. And let me add the piece that I think most people get wrong about these documents, because it caused a real problem in my own extended family. A power of attorney is not the same as a will, and people conflate them constantly. A will controls what happens after you die. A power of attorney controls what happens while you're alive, but unable to act, and those are completely different problems. I've watched a family discover in a hospital waiting room that mom had a beautifully drafted will and no power of attorney whatsoever. So her wishes about her estate were crystal clear, and nobody had any legal authority to make a single decision about her care while she was still breathing. The will was useless in that moment. It's a document about a future that hadn't arrived yet. There's also a specific technical thing worth knowing because it trips people up. A power of attorney needs to be durable, which means it stays in effect after you become incapacitated. A non-durable power of attorney terminates precisely when you lose capacity, which is exactly when you need it. That sounds like a strange rule, and there are historical reasons for it. But the practical point is simple. Make sure the word durable is in there, and an attorney will handle that automatically. And banks and hospitals sometimes give people trouble about accepting a power of attorney, particularly an old one. Some financial institutions have their own forms they prefer. So it's worth asking your bank directly whether they'll accept your document or whether they want theirs, and doing that now rather than during an emergency when your agent is standing at a counter being told no. None of this is complicated, it's just specific. And specific is what nobody tells you. 4 million people are losing their memory with nobody to notice. Now let me tell you the number that I think is the most frightening thing in all the research I read for this, and I want to handle it carefully, because it's genuinely distressing. Researchers estimate that around 4 million American solo agers have cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, or dementia. And as one researcher who studies this put it, many of them lack an advocate who can help them go to medical appointments and manage their medication and their daily lives. 4 million people. Let me explain why that specific combination is so dangerous, because it's not obvious. Cognitive decline is usually noticed by other people first. That's the whole nature of it. The person experiencing it frequently cannot see it, because the very organ that would notice is the one being affected. So it's the daughter who says mom's been repeating herself. It's the husband who notices she got lost driving somewhere familiar. It's the son who finds 3 months of unopened mail. Take away the daughter, the husband, and the son, and the thing that would have been caught at the early stage simply isn't caught. And so what happens instead is that it gets discovered by a crisis. A car accident, a fall, a fire from a stove left on, a utility shutoff because the bills stopped being paid, a neighbor who finally calls somebody after not seeing them for a week. And by the time it's discovered that way, the person is frequently past the point where they could have participated in decisions about their own care, which puts them right back into the guardianship situation I just described. There's also a financial dimension that I think is the most under-discussed part of this. One of the earliest signs of cognitive decline, well before memory problems become obvious, is difficulty with money management. Missed payments, unusual purchases, vulnerability to scams. Research on financial exploitation of older adults consistently finds that people with early cognitive changes are targeted heavily, and that a person living alone with nobody reviewing their accounts is the ideal target. So what do you actually do about this? Because I'm not going to leave you with a horror story and no plan. Set up a check-in system now, while you're well. And I mean a real system, not a vague understanding that people will notice. A daily call at a set time with a friend, not when we think of it. Every day at 9. If there's no answer twice, that person goes to your house or calls somebody who can. There are also services and devices that do this. Some are free through area agencies on aging, and a lot of areas have volunteer telephone reassurance programs where somebody calls older residents daily. Almost nobody knows those exist. Give somebody you trust a spare key and permission to use it. Consider a second set of eyes on your finances. This does not mean giving anybody control. Many banks allow you to add a trusted contact who can be notified of unusual activity but cannot move money. You can set up account alerts that go to a friend. Your bank can flag suspicious transactions. Ask about this at your branch because it costs nothing, and it is designed for exactly this. And get a baseline. Ask your doctor about a cognitive screening while you're fine, so that if there's a change later, there's something to compare it to. Most people only get tested once there's already a problem, which means nobody knows what your normal was. I know how uncomfortable all of this is. Setting up systems that assume you might decline feels like inviting it. But here's how I think about it. You put a smoke detector in your house, not because you expect a fire, because if there is one, you want to know early enough to walk out. And there's one more thing on this that I think is genuinely important and that hardly anybody plans for. Write down what you would want. Not just the legal advance directive, though. Get that too. I mean a plain English letter, in your own words, that says what matters to you, where you'd want to live if you couldn't live alone, what you'd want done with your pets, which is the thing that keeps more older people from accepting help than almost anything else, whether you'd want to stay in your home with paid help, even if it cost more, what you'd absolutely not want, what your funeral should be, who should be told, because here's the situation you're preventing. Somebody, eventually, may have to make decisions on your behalf. If that person is a friend rather than a child, they will be terrified of getting it wrong. They'll have no history to draw on, no memory of you saying something at Thanksgiving 20 years ago, nothing. A letter takes that fear away. It converts an impossible judgment call into following instructions. And I'd add one specific item that people forget entirely. Write down where things are, which bank, which insurance company, where the deed is, whether there's a safe deposit box, and where the key is, your passwords, or at least how to get to them. I know somebody who spent 8 months untangling an estate because nobody knew which of 4 banks the accounts were at, and there were unclaimed accounts and lapsed insurance and a storage unit nobody knew existed. That person was doing it for a friend, out of kindness, with no legal obligation whatsoever. Do not do that to whoever loves you enough to take it on. 1 page, keep it with the legal documents, update it once a year when you check the rest. Here is the good news that almost nobody reports about living alone. Okay. I've been heavy for a while now, so let me give you the part that surprised me most, because it genuinely changed how I think about this whole subject. A Harvard Medical School assistant professor named Dr. Sachin Shah made an observation that I have not been able to stop thinking about. He said that older adults who live alone are generally healthier, more cognitively capable, and more socially connected than the broad group of older people living with a spouse or adult children. And then he explained why, in 4 words that I think are the most important 4 words in this video. Because they have to be. Sit with that for a second. If you live alone, you have to get up, you have to cook, you have to shop, you have to drive or arrange a ride. You have to manage your medications, pay your bills, remember your appointments, and handle whatever goes wrong in the house. Every one of those is a task, and every task is exercise for your body or your brain or both. Whereas a person living with a capable spouse or an adult child very frequently offloads those tasks, gradually and without ever deciding to. He always drove, so she stopped driving. She always handled the bills, so he never learned. And over 10 years, a whole set of capacities quietly atrophies from disuse. Then he dies, and she is 78 and has not driven at night in a decade, and does not know where the accounts are. That's the pattern I've watched in my own extended family more than once. So living alone forces a kind of continuous maintenance that living with somebody does not. And the research suggests that maintenance shows up as better cognitive and functional outcomes. Now, I want to be careful not to oversell this because there's a selection effect in that finding, and I'd be misleading you if I didn't say so. Part of the reason people who live alone look healthier is that people who become quite unwell frequently stop living alone. They move in with a child, or into a facility, so the group that remains living independently is to some degree the group that's still able to And AARP's survey found something else worth holding on to. Solo agers are more worried about losing independence than other older adults and more likely to fear being moved somewhere, which tells you what people actually value here. It isn't that living alone is a consolation prize. For a lot of people, it is genuinely the preferred arrangement. And the fear isn't loneliness, it's losing the autonomy they've built. So I want to say this plainly to anybody watching who lives alone and has been made to feel like a problem to be solved. You are not a tragedy. 35% of people in your situation say the freedom is the best part of it. The research suggests the daily demands of running your own life may be doing something genuinely protective for you. What you need is not pity. What you need is a plan for the specific gap that living alone creates, which is that there's nobody automatically positioned to notice if something changes. That gap is real, and it's fixable. And fixing it does not require giving up one bit of the independence you value. And I want to say one more thing about the independence, because I think we get the framing backwards in this country. We treat asking for help as the opposite of independence. Like the moment you accept assistance, you've surrendered something. I've come to think that's exactly wrong, and here's why. The people who lose their independence, in my observation, are almost never the ones who asked for help early. They're the ones who refused it until a crisis forced the decision out of their hands. The woman who wouldn't accept a ride and kept driving until she had an accident, and then had her license taken, and her house sold, and her life reorganized by other people in 6 weeks. The man who wouldn't let anybody help with the stairs and fell, and never went home again. Accepting a small amount of help, early on your own terms, is how you keep control. Refusing all help until you're overwhelmed is how you lose it. Because at that point, the decisions get made by whoever is standing there. So when I talk about building a support system, I am not asking you to give up your independence. I'm describing the mechanism that protects it. The strongest, most independent older people I know are the ones with the most people around them. Not despite the network. Because of it, nobody advocates for you in a hospital, and that changes your care. I want to talk about hospitals specifically, because this is where being alone has the most immediate and most measurable consequences, and it's the thing I'd most want somebody to understand before they need it. Here's the reality of a modern American hospital. The staff are stretched. Shifts change. The nurse who knows your situation goes home at 7 and a different one comes on. Doctors round quickly. Information gets passed through a chart and in handoffs, and things fall through the cracks in handoffs. And the thing that catches those cracks over and over is a family member sitting in the chair in the corner. That person asks, "What medication is this?" That person says she's allergic to that. That person says he's been asking for pain medicine for 2 hours. That person notices that mom seems more confused today than yesterday, which is something a nurse who met her this morning cannot possibly know. Patient safety research has looked at this and consistently finds that having someone present matters. Not because staff are careless, but because a hospital is a complicated system and the patient is frequently too sick to advocate. So a person who arrives alone is at a genuine disadvantage, and nobody says that out loud because it sounds like an accusation of the staff, and it isn't one. Now here's the specific list of things that go wrong when nobody's there. Discharge planning. This is the big one. Somebody comes in and says you're going home tomorrow and asks who's picking you up and what your home situation is and whether you have stairs and whether somebody will be with you. And if the answers are nobody, yes and no, the plan needs to be different. But if you're groggy and frightened and you say I'll manage, they will write down that you'll manage. Medication reconciliation. Nobody knows what you were taking at home except you, and you're on painkillers. The observation status question, which I've talked about before and which determines whether Medicare pays for your rehab afterward. Somebody needs to ask that question every day, and it will not be you, and simply being noticed. In a busy unit, the patient with a family member in the room gets checked on more. That's not favoritism, that's human nature, and every nurse I've ever spoken to has quietly acknowledged it. So what do you do if you're alone? First, know that hospitals have patient advocates or patient representatives. Every accredited hospital has one. Ask for them by name. Say, I don't have family here and I'd like to speak with a patient advocate. They exist for exactly this, and hardly anybody uses them. Second, hospitals have case managers or discharge planners, and you should ask to speak with one early rather than on the day they're sending you home. Tell them directly, I live alone, I have nobody at home, and I need a discharge plan that accounts for that. Those words trigger a different process, including possible home health services. Third, prepare a one-page document now before you ever need it, and keep a copy in your wallet and one on your refrigerator. Your name, date of birth, medical conditions, all medications with doses, allergies, your doctor's names and numbers, your healthcare power of attorney and their phone number, and any advance directive. Emergency responders are trained to look on refrigerators. That is a real convention, and it works. Fourth, if you're having a scheduled procedure, ask ahead about their requirements. Many surgery centers will not perform a procedure unless a specific named person takes you home. Not a taxi, a person. Find that out weeks in advance, not the morning of, because people have had procedures canceled at the door over exactly this. And fifth, ask a friend to be your hospital person. Not for everything, just for this. Someone who'll come sit for a few hours and ask questions if you're admitted. Most people say yes immediately when asked, and almost nobody asks. Sometimes the family is there, and that isn't the same as having somebody. I want to say something about a group that gets left out of every conversation on this topic, and I hear from these folks constantly, and they carry a particular kind of loneliness that I think is harder than most, the people who have family and cannot rely on them. Because the statistics I've given you count households and blood relations. They do not count whether the relationships work. Research on family estrangement suggests it's far more common than people assume, with a substantial share of adults reporting estrangement from a close family member at some point. And beyond outright estrangement, there's an enormous middle ground, children who are alive and reachable and simply not available. Children with their own struggles, their own illnesses, their own difficult marriages, their own jobs that won't let them travel. There's also a category people don't discuss much, adults who have children but almost no contact with them. One analysis found that around 11% of solo agers have at least one living child but maintain little or no contact. And here's why I think this group has it hardest. If you have nobody, at least the situation is legible, you know where you stand, and you can plan around it. If you have a son in another state who calls on holidays, the situation is ambiguous. You don't know whether he'd come. You've never asked, because asking would force an answer you might not want. So you put his name on the emergency contact line and hope. That hope is genuinely dangerous, because it prevents planning. You don't build the alternative support system, because on paper you have family. So let me say the uncomfortable thing, as gently as I can. If you are not certain that a person would drop everything and come, then for planning purposes treat that as a no and build the system anyway. That is not a judgment on your child. It's not saying they don't love you. It's acknowledging that people have lives, and geography is real, and jobs are inflexible, and a person who genuinely loves you may still not be able to be there in 72 hours. And there's another situation I hear about that I want to name, because people are ashamed of it and shouldn't be. Sometimes the family that exists is not safe. There are older adults whose children have addiction problems, or who have taken money before, or who are simply not people you'd want making medical decisions for you. If that's your situation, please hear this clearly. You are permitted to name somebody else. There is no law and no rule anywhere requiring you to name a relative in a power of attorney. You can name a friend, and you can specifically document your wishes. And if you're worried about being challenged, that's exactly the conversation to have with an elder law attorney, because there are ways to document capacity and intent that make your choices much harder to overturn later. I want to be careful here, because I'm not encouraging anybody to cut off their family based on a video. Relationships are complicated, and I don't know yours. What I'm saying is this. Plan for the situation you actually have, not the one you wish you had or the one that would look better on a form. Because the planning is what protects you, and hope isn't a plan. You can build the family you didn't get, and plenty of people are doing it. Let me spend some time on what actually works, because this is where the useful part is and where I've learned the most from the people who write to me. The concept people use is chosen family, and I know that phrase sounds like something invented recently, but the practice is as old as human beings. It just means the people who show up for you regardless of whether you share blood. Here's what I've noticed about the people who do this well, and there's a pattern. They are deliberate. That's the whole difference. The people who end up genuinely isolated at 80 are almost never people who decided to be. They're people who let it happen through a long series of small, reasonable decisions to stay home this time. So let me give you the specifics. Build around regularity rather than intensity. This is the single most useful thing I can tell you. Friendship at our age is not produced by deep conversations. It's produced by repeated contact with the same people, which means what you need is a recurring slot, not an event. The same coffee shop Tuesday mornings, the same church, the same walking group, the same volunteer shift. Show up 8 or 10 times and something forms without you doing anything clever. Get something with a task attached. particularly if you're not a natural socializer. A volunteer job, a community garden, a choir, a woodworking group, a library program. Tasks carry the conversation for people who find pure socializing awkward, and men in particular tend to do far better side by side than face to face. Be the one who organizes. After 60, an enormous number of people are waiting to be invited to something. Whoever does the inviting becomes the center of a small world very quickly, and it's frequently the least social person who ends up doing it because they finally got tired of waiting. Cultivate people younger than you. I cannot stress this enough, and it's the one people skip. If every single person in your circle is your age, then over the next 15 years, your circle shrinks to nothing through no fault of anybody's. Younger friends, by 20 or 30 years, are the ones who'll still be driving when you aren't. That's not using people, that's how communities have always worked, and you have things to offer them that nobody else does. Look into what already exists in your area. There's a whole model called the Village Movement, which is neighborhood-based membership networks where older adults organize mutual support, rides, help around the house, check-ins, social events. There are hundreds around the country. There are also faith community nurse programs, senior center programs, and in a growing number of places specific solo aging groups. A Shekapernov getting down putting real resources into this. And some communities now have programs specifically for people with no family. One I read about serves a few dozen elder orphans and is planning to expand. The director said something that stuck with me. Elder orphans are often invisible, and there are a lot of people nobody knows are out there. Consider shared housing seriously. I know the stigma, it feels like going backward. But home sharing programs match older homeowners with a spare room to people who need housing, with screening and agreements, and it solves the money problem and the nobody would notice problem at the same time. And here's the practical piece I want everybody to do regardless of anything else. Make an actual list, on paper, of the people who would come if you called at 3 in the morning. Names and numbers. Then look at it honestly. How many names? How old are they? How far away do they live? Is any one of them the person named in your healthcare power of attorney? If that list has 2 or 3 names on it, you're in reasonable shape, and you should maintain them like you'd maintain a roof. If it's empty, that is the single most important item on your list, and it outranks your finances, your health, and everything else, because it's the thing every other item depends on, and it's fixable. It takes about a year of showing up somewhere regularly. That's it, a year. What I would do if I were sitting there watching this alone. Let me finish by putting this all in order, because I know I've given you a lot, and I want it to turn into something you actually do, rather than something you worry about. Start with the paperwork, because it's the highest value and the most neglected. Get a healthcare power of attorney naming a specific person. Get a financial power of attorney. Get an advance directive. Get a will. Those 4 documents. If you do nothing else from this video, do that, because they are the difference between your choices and a stranger's. Name your person, ask them first, and give them a copy. Give another copy to your doctor's office. Tell somebody where the originals are. If you truly cannot name a person, ask an elder law attorney about professional options, and ask your area agency on aging about free or low-cost legal clinics, because they exist in a great many places. Then set up the noticing system. Arrange a daily check-in at a set time. Ask your area agency on aging whether there's a telephone reassurance program, because a lot of counties have one and it's free. Give somebody a spare key and permission to use it. Add a trusted contact to your bank accounts, which does not give them control, but does mean somebody else can be alerted to unusual activity. Ask your doctor for a cognitive baseline while you're well. Then do the relationship work, and be as deliberate about it as you would be about a home repair. Pick one recurring thing and commit to it for a year. 1. Same day, same place, same people. Deliberately build at least one friendship with somebody 20 or 30 years younger. Make the 3 in the morning list and be honest about what's on it. And then the housing question, which I'd ask you to think about earlier than feels necessary. Look at where you live and ask honestly what happens if you can't drive. Because that's coming for most of us, and a house 3 miles from anything becomes a very different house at 82 than it was at 66. If you're going to move at some point, moving while you can still manage a move and still build a new network is a completely different proposition from moving after a crisis when it's done for you and you have no say. Now let me say the last thing, and it's the one I actually care about most. There's a phrase in one of the reports I read that I haven't been able to shake. Aging without a mythic family support system, which everyone assumes people have, is tough for everybody. A mythic family support system. That's exactly right, isn't it? We've built an entire country on the assumption of a family that's nearby, willing, able, and available. And for millions of us, that family does not exist, and never did. And it isn't anybody's failure. So if you're sitting there alone watching this, I want you to hear that you are not the exception. 28% of people your age live alone. 43% of women over 75. 24 million people over 50 with nobody else in the house. That's not a sad minority. That's an enormous portion of this country. And the reason it feels lonely is partly that nobody talks about it, so everybody thinks they're the only one. You're not the only one. You might be the only one on your street who said it out loud. So say it. Tell somebody the truth about your situation. Because every single solution in this video starts with one other person knowing where you stand, and shame is the thing that keeps that from happening. If you're doing all right, look around at who might not be, and be the one who keeps inviting them. And if you're the one who's alone, please pick one thing from this list, and do it this week. Drop a comment below and tell me your situation. Tell me what's worked for you, or what you're worried about. Because I read every one, and honestly, there are people in this comment section who have found each other, and that is the whole point. We keep it real here, and we look out for each other. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye for now.